This is Total Retail Tech Insights.
The content retail executives need to optimize their use of technology throughout their organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail, and I'm pleased to be joined on today's episode by Katie Carlson, the Vice President of Partner Success at Fluent. Katie and I are going to talk a little bit about how retailers are navigating the challenging times and tighter margins that have come with a number of the different external circumstances that are impacting consumers. You know, thinking about a time of layoffs and shrinking budgets and increased pressure on performance. Brand side marketers, or former brand side marketers, I should say, like Katie, are finding new ways to help retailers unlock revenue, and this time from the technology side in Katie's position, again, as Vice President of Partner Success at Fluent. So with that lead in, I'd like to welcome you to the show, and thanks for taking the time to join me, Katie.
Thanks, Joe. Super excited to be here.
So to get us started, I mentioned, it's a time of kind of uncertainty and transition for many retail organizations. I'd like to talk a little bit about shifting from brand to technology, and you've made that shift in your own career from a brand side marketer to a tech partner. Personally, talk a little bit about what inspired that move and how it's changed your mindset and the way you think about supporting retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Fluent now for about 5 months, but prior to joining, I led the retail media network for Overstock.com and then later BedBathAndBeyond.com after we acquired that brand after their bankruptcy. And what was really cool about that experience was we built a lot of our tech in-house. And, so I would say firsthand experience with how operationally challenging that was, just given, and I think all brands and retailers probably have this problem, limited tech bandwidth and competing priorities and balancing the expectations to generate revenue with don't hurt the customer experience. And so I think that experience has given me a real deep appreciation for how complex it is for large enterprise companies to move fast and scale, I think, thoughtfully. And so when the opportunity to join Fluent and lead partner success presented itself, I really looked at that as a chance to solve some of those same problems. And I think because I have literally been in some of my partner's shoes, it gives me a great ability to be a real advocate for them. And our goal when we partner with a retailer or a brand is really to become I'd say a trusted extension of their team. And so I think, those experiences have positioned me well to do that.
Yeah, and it's kind of a new venture for you, and it's an exciting time for you personally. So one of the things that struck me in your last answer, Katie, was the kind of idea of competing priorities. And I want to think about this, at a time when for many organizations and teams are lean, budgets are tight. As a leader, what does it look like from your perspective to think from a place of enablement versus execution?
I think it means setting up your team with the right tools, outlining clear priorities, and giving them autonomy and essentially getting out of their way and letting them do their jobs. I think effective leaders can't be the executioner of every task. And I'm a big believer in having my teams use statements like I intend to, making it easy for me to either empower them to go solve that problem on their own or, give them feedback when needed. So, if they come to me and say, I have this problem, what should I do? I think that it's more productive if they can come to me and say, I have this problem, I've thought about it, this is what I intend to do. And then it makes it really easy for me to say, yes, go do that, I'm aligned. Or that sounds great, but have you thought about XYZ? And then we can have a dialogue about it.
Yeah, and I think as from your answer, it also sometimes comes down to knowing what you don't know, right? And then being to word you used, you have to have the trust in the people on your team that they're able to produce the quality work that you've potentially hired them for. There's a reason they're on the team, having them, have that autonomy to go out and, make their own decisions. Obviously, guided feedback from you as the leader. But I think that's thinking about it that way. Is that kind of your mindset as well, Katie?
Absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about business strategy here, and in particular, some of the work that Fluent is doing, and specifically related to the checkout experience. So can you talk a little bit about how retailers are evolving their view of the checkout page? It's could previously kind of thought of as a static moment to now a monetizable touch point for the consumer, for the retailer rather, when consumers are landing at checkout.
Absolutely. I think you said it. I think previously retailers really did view that as more of a static and solely a transactional page. And I think increasingly retailers are viewing checkout as not truly the end of the customer's journey and rather a high value monetizable moment. And so, with that old view, I think the purpose really was finalize the sell quickly, no distractions. We don't want to interrupt the conversion in any way. And even from a design standpoint, it was very minimal, very utility focused, black and white, payment, shipping, really cut and dry. And I think, the new view of that is that we can be a little bit more strategic. And I think the purpose and sort of the mindset now is how do we maximize value in for each of those transactions and not just close the cart. I think the conversion is still oh so critical, but so is delivering some additional customer value, and incremental revenue isn't so bad either. And then even from a design evolution, I think there's such lightweight and non-disruptive ways to enhance that experience that retailers are playing with now.
Are there particular opportunities that you believe retailers are missing out on by overlooking, particularly at checkout, that portion of the customer journey? You mentioned incremental revenue is maybe it's cross-sell and upsell opportunities, other facets, maybe it's loyalty, right? What are some of the things that you're pinpointing as opportunities that can be captured by optimizing that checkout experience?
Yeah, I think there really is a missed opportunity to engage the customer when their purchase intent is really high. Literally, they just purchase from you, so trust is established and their credit card is still out. And I think that there's this maybe misconception that brands need to spend more to earn more, but in reality, they could just make more of that final step. And so, Joe, you mentioned a few things that I do think it's the shift of less about acquisition and more about optimization. And so it's how do we improve conversion rates? How do we look for opportunities and where does it make sense to upsell or cross sell different things? I think, improving retention and really focusing on loyalty is key. And I think what sort of ties all of that together is the personalization aspect and how good can we get at knowing who this customer is and what to show them in that moment.
So thinking about the acquisition of customers, we talked about checkout, but to get them to check out, you first need to get them on site. How do you think about low lift, high impact monetization when it comes to customer acquisition?
Yeah. I think when I think about low lift, high impact, I think it's number one, whoever you're partnering with and in implementing their tech, that needs to be super easy to implement. I think, like we mentioned, tech resources are really hard to come by in these large companies. And for us, when we onboard a partner, thankfully, they can get us live in truly an hour's worth of work. But so when I think of low lift, that's definitely what I think about. I think there needs to be little to no operational lift from like an ongoing management standpoint. Hopefully, this is not a cumbersome piece of something that you're managing. And then I think for us, being able to deliver a guaranteed or kind of near guaranteed revenue per transaction, that's really high impact for the from a P&L standpoint, I would say. And then the end all be all is enhancing the customer experience. That needs to be really front and center of whatever solution you're implementing.
So with that in mind, Katie, are there some best practices, tips that you might recommend as you think about how retailers can add monetization to the checkout experience? Obviously, you've talked about the user experience and they don't want to jeopardize that, but there are some, do you have some ideas on ways they can add some monetization to checkout without disrupting that UX?
Absolutely. I think something that needs to really be prioritized is obviously relevance. And, for us, we use a lot of data in that moment to determine what sort of offer to show the customer in that moment. I think keeping the experience really native, so whatever you're going to show, having it kind of seamlessly blend in with the site is important. And then, of course, it needs to really be a value add. I think a mistake brands can make is, going after more of like that short-term gain and potentially sacrificing the long-term trust that they've established with a customer. I think something else I would encourage brands to do is really A/B test and not just creative the types of offers and the way in which you're serving them. Something that we work really closely with our partners on is creative testing. We have a very robust roadmap of testing that we like to roll out once we launch a new partner because we really want to give the customer the opportunity to sort of tell us what they like and what they're most engaged with. So yeah, those are a few I would say that are really important. I think brands should also establish guardrails. What types of things make sense to show your audience and what things don't, and don't budge on that.
Yeah, when you think about the A/B testing too, kind of letting the data dictate what your next move would be, right?
Exactly.
So having that testing mindset. One thing we didn't talk about a little bit or haven't talked about yet is the order confirmation page. That's another opportunity for continued engagement with the customer. As a former brand marketer, you have that in your experience there. Are there any insights you might share with our retail audience that they're hesitant to kind of monetize that order confirmation page?
Yeah, I think it's just truly a missed opportunity. The reality is the sale is done. You're not jeopardizing conversion. And I think if framed right as like a thank you or a bonus in some way, I think post-purchase offers on that order confirmation page can really feel like value. It doesn't have to feel like noise. And I think it's one of the safest places brands can really test and learn because it's after the conversion has already occurred.
Yeah. Let's talk about the advertising for a minute and kind of what you're presenting to consumers from a brand perspective. How do you or what do you see non-endemic ads? What do they actually mean in terms of the context of brand safety, control, the experience for the consumer? You have that background as a brand marketer, something probably that you've spent a lot of time thinking about. What are your thoughts there, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the context of brand safety control and that experience, those concerns usually, I think there traditionally there have been concerns around will these ads conflict with or harm the retailer, their brand, the trust the customer has with them. From a control standpoint, I think retailers worry, how much control do I actually have? Will I be able to dictate when and where these ads show up? Will they be relevant, or will, things slip through the cracks? And then from an experience standpoint, I think the worry is, are these going to feel jarring? Does it feel out of place? Is it disrupting their shopping journey? And I think what has sort of changed and why this model is working a little bit better now is, and why it doesn't feel as risky to brands, is because I think the technology and the targeting capabilities are truly amazing. I've mentioned we utilize a lot of data in those moments to serve the most relevant offer. And so I think there's been a lot of advancement in that regard. I think the reality is that retailers can and should have all the control. We're very transparent, maybe even to a fault, in that we let our partners know who our advertisers are, what does the creative look like, where do these landing pages go to, and I think they deserve to have that so that they can, make the best decisions possible for their businesses. I think the other thing is, we've talked a little bit about creative, and I think the native nature of these formats really help make these ads feel not intrusive at all and really help preserve the look and feel of the site. And then lastly, I think there's just been this evolution where customers have just grown more accustomed to seeing ads across platforms like Amazon, all the social platforms. And so I think their tolerance and expectation for those kinds of experiences has grown.
Yeah, that's what you touched on. Lastly, what I was going to mention was that the consumers seem more receptive to being shown ads that on different platforms across different channels. Um, and to your point about the technology has improved, right? So we're able to personalize and really target based upon the individual user. So there's a couple different factors that are in play there. I want to go back to monetization and thinking about trust, right? Versus kind of the idea that you're just bombarding the consumer with different ads and you're kind of not taking into account their behavior, the relevance of the ad, the kind of the spray and pray traditional model. So with that in mind, how do you think about preserving customer trust while still monetizing effectively, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the balance is that there has to be sort of this value exchange. Customers should feel like they're getting something out of this without feeling exploited. And I think the retailer needs to figure out, okay, how do I earn incremental revenue without eroding customer trust, without sacrificing the aesthetics or hurting loyalty? And I think it just still comes down to prioritizing relevance and, utilizing those really seamless and native types of experiences, maintaining that control and being super clear about, potentially when things are being sponsored or being promoted. I think brands should also potentially allow, customers to sort of manage those opt-out preferences. For us, if a retailer, actions against a DNS list, like we will work with you on that. I think finding partners that are willing to do those things with you is really important. And then setting those guardrails, like I said, I think figuring out what makes sense to show your customer and what doesn't. And the last thing is, I think measuring that experience and the impact it's having alongside revenue is important. There's always going to be some give and take there, but I think it's important to keep an eye on bounce rates and and conversion rates and promoter scores and, pay attention to what the customer sentiment is and in reviews and things like that. And I think if there is noise, work with your partner on it and fix it.
Yeah, you addressed something that I was going to follow up with at the end there around the measurement piece, and in particular those traditional metrics of bounce rate, conversion. I was going to ask you what are some of the metrics or the data that retailers should be looking at, thinking about to understand if they're doing this effectively, right? So if they're kind of preserving that customer trust while still monetizing, through the use of ads. So I guess it just comes back to some of those traditional metrics of bounce and conversion rate.
I think from the retailer side, those are things that they should monitor. And then from our side of things, we're constantly looking at click-through rates and trying to get a read on engagement and obviously conversion from our side. When we show an offer to a customer, are they clicking? Are they converting? And what's sort of the lifetime value of that? I think those are other things that are really important to keep a pulse on as well.
So we're going to wrap up our conversation by kind of going full circle and kind of getting back to where we started our conversation, Katie. We talked about your beginning kind of on the partner side as a brand marketer, now on the technology side of the relationship. As you think about that, is there one piece of advice or thoughts that you might have on that you would give to your past self as a brand marketer, knowing what you know now in your role at Fluent?
Absolutely. I would say don't be afraid to pilot something new, especially when it comes with low risk and some really good potential upside. I think it's easy for us to kind of stay heads down and say, okay, well, this is how we've always done it. We don't want to disrupt anything. But I think if you can step back and think about, okay, what more can we do in this moment, that it's beneficial to do so. The other thing I would say is advice I would have given my former self is that not everything needs to be built in-house or solved from scratch. And I think for retailers that are looking for partners, that they can really bring real value in certain aspects of the business. And I'd say lean in and ask them the hard questions. If you're vetting a vendor, technology provider or partner, I'd say ask them the hard questions, ask them for more support than just a pitch deck. The reality is when we're speaking to a prospective partner, we want to win their business and we want to make it really easy for them to say yes to us. And so I would say lean in on that.
Yeah. And to what you noted earlier, your job is to help retailers identify and unlock some of that incremental revenue, whether it's checkout, whether it's a confirmation page, whether it's, through the advertising as well. And you're doing that at Fluent. So I want to take the opportunity to thank Katie Carlson, again, the Vice President of Partner Success at Fluent, for joining us on this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Tech Insights is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Tech Insights.